Yay, I'm live. It's been, what, 3 weeks since my last stream? There are no cats on the cat cam yet. Oh well. So, I hope everyone's been having a great week, and it is now May. Can you imagine that? 1st of May. I was sitting in Curly's chat earlier, and she was celebrating her 3rd anniversary of streaming, and I realized that yesterday was actually the 3rd anniversary of my unofficial official debut. So I've been doing this kind of stuff for a little over 3 years, but still. 3 years of streaming and telling storytellers. I've been doing this for a while. Also means I've been using this model for 3 years. I'm on my 2nd computer for streaming, because the first computer I was using was my laptop, which I went ahead and decided to build this one just so I could get, games to stream. Eventually I will actually stream some games, since I have a computer that can do them. I am open to get donations via Throne to help upgrade it, because apparently 3 gig of video RAM is not enough for most games. Which is fine, because most of the games I play don't take that much. I'm opening my bottle of hydration. But we are back for more Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. Again, we're only maybe a little over halfway through this book. I keep hearing that there's a 3rd book in the series, but I don't own it. And for those who aren't keeping tag on Twitter, I broke down, got a inexpensive cell phone line, and I have officially opened my Stories for the Kids channel on YouTube. Well, Stories for the Cubs, technically. And I'll be recording offline for that one, and editing and posting the videos for that. So feel free to subscribe. Why am I hearing such a bad echo? Anyway, as I said, Rivals of Sherlock Holmes, Stories for the Cubs. I'll go ahead and post a link for it real quick. That is the new YouTube channel. I'm trying to get videos set up for it and uploaded. It will be the more kid-friendly version of stories. And I've got the first 3 books of The Wizard of Oz loaded on it already, so let's go ahead and get over to the study so I can get ready for this stream. Okay. Okay. Everything's set. Looks like it. Can you hear the fan noises? Because I do have a little cooling fan underneath my desk. Well, around the corner from my desk that hopefully shouldn't be picking up with the microphone. Oh, yeah, and I'd also like to thank Soul for being follower 420. So if you're not following them, by all means, give them a follow. If you can, or if you're like maxed out on follows like I am, I can't really follow anyone else unless I start unfollowing people, which is generally a pain. Let me check. Okay, my mic levels are saying I'm speaking roughly in the yellow, so that should be good. Let me make sure one more thing. Okay, added another 10% to make sure. Okay, but anyway, it's 9:08. Feel free to settle back. Hold on, let me type a message here. Okay. Okay. So it is 9:09. It looks like we are starting a new author. So we are going to start into The Chains of Crime by E.W. Hornung. Story number 1. The Ides of March. It was about 12:30 when I returned to the Albany as a last desperate resort. Little had changed while my heart had been turning gray. The baccarat counters still stood at the table with the empty glasses and the loaded ashtrays. A window had been opened to let the smoke out, and was letting in the fog instead. Raffles himself had merely changed his dining jacket for one of his many blazers, yet he arched his eyebrows as though I had dragged him from his bed. "Forgot something," he said, when he saw me on his mat. "No," said I, pushing past him without ceremony, and leading the way into his room, with an impudence amazing to myself. "Not come back for your revenge, have you? Because I'm afraid I can't give it to you single-handed. I was sorry myself that the others—" We were face to face by the fireside, and I cut him short. "Raffles," I said, "you may well be surprised at my coming back in this way at this hour. I hardly know you. I was never in your rooms before tonight. But I was your fag at school, and you said you remembered me. Of course, that's no excuse, but will you listen to me for 2 minutes?" In my emotion, I had at first to struggle for every word, But his face reassured me as I went on, and I was not mistaken in its expression. "Certainly, my man," he said. "As many minutes as you like. Have a Sullivan and sit down." And he handed me his silver cigarette case. "No," I said, finding my full voice as I shook my head. "No, I won't smoke, and I won't sit down, thank you. Nor will you ask me to either when you've heard what I really have to say." "Really," he said, lighting his own cigarette with one clear blue eye upon me. "How do you know?" "Because you'll probably show me the door," I cried bitterly, "and you'll be justified in doing it. But let me get it over, for God's sake. You know I dropped over 200 just now." He nodded. "I hadn't the money in my pocket, I remember. But I had my checkbook, and I wrote each of you a check at that desk." "Well?" "Not one of them was worth the paper it was written on, Raffles. I'm overdrawn already at the bank." "Surely only for the moment." "No, I have spent everything. But somebody told me that you were well off. I heard you had to come in some money." "So I did, 3 years ago. It had been my curse, and now it's all gone, every penny. Yes, I've been a fool. There never was nor will be such a fool as I've been. Isn't this enough for you? Why don't you turn me out?" He was walking up and down with a very grave face indeed. "Couldn't your people do anything?" he asked at length. "My people? I have none. Thank God there were no hearts to break. I was an only son. That's where the mischief began. This was my poor father's money. He worked hard for it. Thank God he is gone and will never know." I cast myself into a chair and hid my face. Raffles continued to pace the rich carpet that was a piece of everything else in his rooms. There was no variation in his soft and even footfalls. "You have a flat somewhere?" he said at last. "Yes, in Mount Street." "What about furniture?" I laughed aloud in my misery. "There's been a bill of sale on every stick for months." Raffles stood quite still with raised eyebrows and staring eyes that I could meet the better now that he knew the worst. Then with a shrug he resumed his walk. For some minutes neither of us spoke. But in his handsome, unmoved face I read my fate and death warrant, and with every breath I cursed my folly and my cowardice in coming to him at all. Because he had been kind to me at school, when he was captain of the 11, and I was his fag, and I dared to look for kindness from him now. Because I was ruined, and he rich enough to play cricket all the summer, and do nothing for the rest of the year, I was fatuously counted on his mercy, his sympathy, his help. Yes, I had relied on him in my heart for all my outward diffidence and humility, and I was rightly served. There was little mercy and less sympathy in that curling nostril, that rigid jaw, and that cold blue eye which never glanced my way. I caught up my hat. I blundered to my feet. I would have gone without a word, but Raffles stood between me and the door. "Where are you going?" he said. "That's my business," I replied. "I won't trouble you any more." "Then how am I to help you?" "I didn't ask for your help." "Then why come to me?" "God knows," I exclaimed. "Will you let me pass?" "Not until you tell me where you're going and what you mean to do." "Can't you guess?" I cried, and for many seconds we stood staring in each other's eyes. "Have you got the pluck?" said he, breaking the spell in a tone so cynical that it brought my last drop of blood to a boil. "You shall see," said I, and as I stepped back and whipped my pistol from my overcoat pocket. "Now you will let me pass, or shall I do it here?" The barrel touched my temple, and my thumb the trigger. Mad with excitement as I was, ruined, dishonored, and now finally determined to make an end of my misspent life, My only surprise to this day is that I did not do it then and there. The despicable satisfaction of involving another in one's destruction added its miserable appeal to my baser egotism. And had fear or horror flown into my companion's face, I shudder to think I might have died diabolically happy with that look for my last impious consolation. It was the look that came instead which held my hand. Neither fear nor horror were in it, only wonder, admiration, and such a measure of pleased expectancy as caused me after all to pocket my revolver with an oath. "You devil," I said. "I believe you wanted me to do it." "Not quite," was the reply, made with a little start, and a change of color that came too late. "To tell you the truth, though, I half thought you meant it, and was never more fascinated in my life. I never dreamt you had such stuff in you, Bunny. Now I'm hanged if I let you go now, and you'd better not try that game again, for you won't catch me stand and look a second time. We must think of some way out of this mess. I had no idea that you were a chap of that sort. There, let me have the gun." With that, one of his hands fell kindly on my shoulder, while the other slipped into the pocket of my overcoat, and I suffered him to deprive me of the weapon without a murmur. Nor was this simply because Raffles had the subtle power of making himself irresistible at will. He was beyond comparison the most masterful man whom I had ever known, yet my acquiescence was due to more than the mere subjection of the weaker nature to the stronger. The forlorn hope which had brought me to Albany was turned by magic into an almost staggering sense of safety. Raffles would help me after all. Raffles would be my friend. It was as though all the world had come roundly suddenly to my side. So far, therefore, from resisting his action, I caught and clasped his hand with a fervor as uncontrollable as the frenzy which had preceded it. "God bless you," I cried. "Forgive me for everything. I will tell you the truth. I did think you might perhaps help me in my extremity, though I well knew that I had no claim upon it. Still, for old school's sake, for the sake of old times, I thought you might give me another chance. If you wouldn't, I meant to blow out my brains, and will still if you change your mind." In truth, I feared that it was changing, with the expression even as I spoke, in spite of his kindly tone, and his kindlier use of my old-school nickname. His next words showed me my mistake. "What a boy it is to jumping to conclusions! I have my vices, Bunny, but backing and filling is not one of them. Sit down, my good fellow, and have a cigarette to soothe your nerves. I insist. Whiskey? The worst thing for you. Here's some coffee that I had brewing when you came in. Now listen to me. You speak of another chance. What do you mean by that? Another chance at baccarat? No, if I know it. You think the luck must turn, suppose it didn't. We should have only made bad worse. No, my dear chap, you've plunged enough. Do you put yourself in my hands, or do you not? Very well, then you plunge no more, and I undertake not to present my check. Unfortunately, there are the other men, and still more unfortunately, Bunny, I'm as hard up at this moment as you are yourself." It was my turn to stare at Raffles. "You," I vociferated, "you hard up? How am I to sit here and believe that?" "Did I refuse to believe of you?" he returned, smiling. "And with your own experience, you think that because a man has rooms in this place, and belongs to a club or two, and plays a little cricket, he must necessarily have a balance at the bank? I tell you, my dear man, that this moment I'm as hard up as you ever were. I have nothing but my wits to live on, absolutely nothing else. It was a necessity for me to win some money this evening, as it was for you. But we're in the same boat, Bunny. We'd better pull together." Together, I echoed eagerly. I'll do anything in this world for you, Raffles, if you really mean that you won't give me away. Think of anything you like, and I'll do it. I was a desperate man when I came here, and I'm just as desperate now. I don't mind what I do, if only I can get out of this without a scandal. Again I see him, leaning back in one of his luxurious chairs in which his room was furnished. I see his indolent, athletic figure, his pale, sharp, clean-shaven features, his curly black hair, his strong, unscrupulous mouth. And again I feel the clear beam of his wonderful eye, cold and luminous as a star, shining into my brain, sifting the very secrets of my heart. "I wonder if you would," he said at length. "You would in your present mood, but who would back your mood to the last? Still, there's hope when a chap takes that tone. Now I think of it too, you were a plucky little devil at school. You once did a rather good turn, I recollect. Remember it, Bunny? Well, wait a bit, and perhaps I'll be able to do you a better one. Give me the time to think." He got up, lit a fresh cigarette, and fell to the pacing the room once more, but with a slower and more thoughtful step, and for a much longer period than before. Twice he stopped at my chair as though at the point of speaking, but each time he checked himself and returned his stride in silence. Once he threw up the window, which he had shut some time, and stood for some moments leaning out into the fog which filled the Albany courtyard. Meanwhile, the clocks on the chimney-piece struck one, and one again for the half-hour, without a word between us. Yet I not only kept my chair in patience, but I acquired the incongruous equanimity of the half-hour. Insensibly I had shifted my burden to the broad shoulders of this splendid friend, and my thoughts wandered with my eyes as the minutes passed. The room was a good-sized square one, with the folding doors and the marble mantelpiece and the gloomy, old-fashioned distinction peculiar to that of Albany. It was charmingly furnished and arranged, with the right amount of negligence and the right amount of taste. What struck me most, however, was the absence of the usual insignia of a cricketer's den. Instead of the conventional rack of well-worn bats, a carved oak bookcase with every shelf in a litter filled the better part of one wall, and where I looked for cricketing groups, I found reproductions of such works as Love and Death and The Blessed Damozel, in dusty frames and different parallels. The man might have been a minor poet instead of an athlete at the first water. Yet there had always been a fine streak of aestheticism in his complex composition. Some of these were very pictures I had myself dusted in his study at school, and they set me thinking in yet another of his many sides, and of the little incidents to which he had just referred. Everybody knows how largely the tone of the public school depends on that of the 11, and on the charter of that captain of cricket in particular. And I have never heard it denied that in Raffles' time our tone was good, or that such influence as he troubled to exert was on the side of the angels. Yet it was whispered in the school that he was in the habit of parading the town at night in loud checks and a false beard. It was whispered and disbelieved. I alone knew it for a fact, for night after night I had pulled the rope up after him when the rest of the dormitory were asleep, and kept awake by that hour to let it down, or even a given signal. When one night he was overbold and within an ace of ignominy, expulsion in the next heyday of his fame, consummate daring and extraordinary nerve on his part, aided doubtless by a little persistence of mind on mine, averted that untoward result, and no more need said than a discreditable credit. But I could not pretend to have forgotten it in throwing myself on this man's mercy in my desperation. and I was wondering how much of his leniency was owing to the fact that Raffles had not forgotten it either, when he stopped and stood over my chair once more. "I've been thinking of that night we had the narrow squeak," he began. "Why do you start?" "I was thinking of it too." He smiled as though he had read my thoughts. "Well, you were the right sort of little beggar then, Bunny. You didn't talk and you didn't flinch. You asked no questions and you told no tales. I wonder if you're like that now." "I don't know," said I, slightly puzzled by his tone. "I've made such a mess of my own affairs that I trust myself about as little as I'm likely to be trusted by anybody else. Yet I never in my life went back on a friend. I will say that. Otherwise, perhaps I mightn't be in such a hole tonight." "Exactly," said Raffles, nodding to himself, as though in assent to some hidden train of thought. "Exactly what I remember of you, and I'll bet it's all still true now as it was 10 years ago. We don't alter, Bunny. We only develop. I suppose neither you nor I have really altered since you used to let down that rope and I used to come up it in the hand over hand. You would still stick for nothing for it, pal. What?" "At nothing in the world," I was pleased to cry. "Not even at crime," said Raffles, smiling. I stopped to think, for his tone had changed, and I felt sure that he was chaffing me. Yet his eyes seemed as much in earnest as ever, and for my part, I was in no mood for reservations. "No, not even at that," I cried. "Name your crime, and I'm your man." He looked at me one moment in wonder, then another moment in doubt, then turned the matter with a shake of his head, and a little cynical laugh that was all his own. "You're a nice chap, Bunny, a real desperate character. What, suicide one moment and any crime I like in the next? What you want is a drag, my boy, and you did well to come here as a decent, law-abiding citizen with a reputation to lose. Nonetheless, we must have that money tonight, by hook or by crook." "Tonight, Raffles? The sooner the better. Every hour after 10 o'clock tomorrow morning is an hour of risk. Let one of those checks be presented at your own bank, and you and it are dishonored together. No, we must raise the win tonight, and I rather think I know where it can be raised." "At 2 o'clock in the morning?" "Yes." "But how? Where? At such an hour?" "From a friend of mine here in the Bond Street." "He must be a very intimate friend." "Intimate's not the word. I have the run of his place and a latchkey all to myself." "You would knock him up at this hour of the night?" "If he's in bed." "And it's essential that I should go in with you?" "Absolutely." "Then I must. But I'm bound to say I don't like the idea, Raffles." "Do you prefer the alternative?" asked my companion with a sneer. "No, hang it, that's unfair," he cried apologetically in the same breath. "I quite understand, it's a beastly ordeal, but it would never do for you to stay outside. I tell you what, you shall have a peg before we go start. Just one. There's a whiskey, there's a siphon, and I'll be putting on an overcoat while you help yourself." Well, I dare say I did so with some freedom, for this plan was his, and not. Piccadilly was a trench of raw white fog, rimmed with blurred street lamps and lined with a thin coating of adhesive mud. We met no other wayfarers on the deserted flagstone streets, and we ourselves favored with a very hard stare from the constable of the beat, who, however, touched his helmet on recognizing my companion. "You see, I'm known to the police," laughed Raffles as we passed on. "Poor devils, they've got to keep their weather eye open on a night like this. A fog may be a bore to you and me, Bunny, but it's a perfect godsend to the criminal classes, especially so late in their season. Here we are, though, and I'm hanged if the beggar isn't in bed and asleep after all." We had turned onto Bond Street and had halted on the curb a few yards down to the right. Raffles was gazing up at some windows across the road, windows barely discernible through the mist, and without the glimmer of a light to throw them out. They were over a jeweler's shop, and I could see by the peephole in the shop door and the bright light burning within. But entire upper part, with a private street door next to the shop, was black and blank as the night sky itself. "Better give it up for tonight," I urged. "Surely the morning will be up in no time." "Not a bit of it," said Raffles. "I have his key. We'll surprise him. Come along." And seizing my right arm, he hurried me across the road and opened the door with the latch key. In another moment had shut it up swiftly but softly behind us. We stood together in the dark. Outside, a measured step was approaching. We had heard it through the fog as we crossed the street. Now, as it drew nearer, my companion's fingers tightened around my arm. "It may be the chap himself," he answered. "He's a devil of a night bird. Not a sound, Bunny. We'll startle the life out of him. Ah!" The measured step had passed without a pause. Raffles drew in a deep breath, and a singular grip of me slowly relaxed. "But still, not a sound," he continued in the same whisper. "We'll take a rise out of him, wherever he is. Slip off your shoes and follow me." Well, you may wonder at my doing so, but you can never have met A.J. Raffles. Half of his power lay in concealing trick and sinking the commander to the leader, and it was impossible not to follow one who led such a zest. You might question, but you followed first. So now, when I heard him kick off his own shoes, I did the same, and was on the stairs at his heels before I realized what an extraordinary way was his of approaching a stranger for money in the dead of night. But obviously Raffles and he were on exceptional terms of intimacy, and I could not but infer that they were in the habit of playing practical jokes on each other. We groped our way up so slowly up the stairs, and I had time to make more than one note before we reached the top. The stair wasn't carpeted. The spread fingers on my right hand encountered nothing on the damp wall. Those on my left trailed through dust that could be felt on the bed. "Where have you brought me?" I cried. "This house is unoccupied." "Hush! Wait!" he whispered, and he led the way into one of the empty rooms. "Where have you brought me?" I cried. "The house is..." His match went out as we closed the threshold, and he struck another without the slightest noise. Then he stood with his back to me, fumbling with something that I could not see. But when he threw the second match away, there was some other light on instead, a slight smell of oil. I stepped forward to look over his shoulder, but before I could, he had turned and flashed a tiny lantern in my face. "What's this?" I gasped. "What devil's trick are you going to play?" "It's played," he answered with a quiet laugh. "On me? I'm afraid so." "There's no one in the house, then?" "No one but ourselves." "So it was mere chaff about your friend in Bond Street, who would let us have the money." "Not altogether. It's quite true that Dabney is a friend of mine." "Danby? The jewel underneath." "What do you mean?" I whispered, trembling like a leaf as his meaning dawned upon me. "We're here to get money from the jeweler?" "Well, not exactly." "What then?" "The equivalent. From his shop." There was no need for another question. I understood everything but my own destiny. My own density. He had given me a dozen hints, and I had taken none. And there I stood, staring at him in an empty room. And there he stood with his dark lantern, laughing at me. "A burglar!" I gasped. "You? You?" "I told you I lived by my wits." "Why couldn't you tell me what you were going to do? Why couldn't you trust me? Why must you lie?" I demanded, piqued to the quick, for all my horror. "I wish to tell you," he said. "I was on the point of telling you once more. You may remember how I sounded about the crime, though you have probably forgotten what you said yourself. I didn't think you meant it at the time, but I thought you'd put you to the test. Now I see you didn't, and I don't blame you. I am only to blame. Get out of it, my dear boy, as quick as you can. Leave it to me. You won't give me away, whatever else you do. Oh, his cleverness, his cursed cleverness. He had fallen back on threats, coercion, and sneers. All might have been different even yet, but he set me free to leave him in the lurch. He would not blame me. He did not even bind me to secrecy. He trusted me. He knew my weakness and my strength, and was playing on both with his master's touch. Not so fast, said I. Did I put this into your head, or were you going to do it any case? Well, not in any case, said Raffles. It's true I've had the key for days, but when I won tonight I thought of chucking it, for, as a matter of fact, it's not a one-man job. That settles it. I'm your man. You mean it? Yes, for tonight. Good old Bunny, he murmured, holding the lantern for one moment to my face. The next he was explaining his plans, and I was nodding, as though we had been fellow cracksmen all our days. I know the shop, he whispered, because I've got a few things there. I know the upper part, too. It's been to let for a month, and I got an order to view it, and took a cast of the key before using it. The one thing I didn't know was how to make a connection between the two. At present there's none. We may make it up here, though I rather fancy a basement myself. If you wait a moment, I'll tell you. He set his lantern on the floor and crept to a back window, and opened it with scarcely a sound, only to return shaking his head after shutting the window with the same care. That was our one chance, he said. A back window above the back window, but it's too dark to see anything. We daren't show an outside light. Come down after me to the basement, and remember, though there's not a soul on the premises, you can't make too little noise. There, listen to that. It was a measured tread that we had heard before on the flagstones outside. Raffles darkened his lantern, and again we stood motionless till it had passed. Either policemen, he muttered, or watchmen that all these jewelers run between them. The watchman's a man for us to watch. He simply paid to spot this kind of game. We crept very gingerly down the stairs, which creaked a bit in spite of us, and we picked up our shoes in the passage, then down some narrow stone steps, at the foot of which Raffles showed his light, and put on his shoes once more, bidding me to do the same in a rather loud tone than he had heard himself permitted in the employ overhead. We were now considerably below the level of the street, and in a small space with as many doors as it is sides. 3 were ajar, and we saw one of them through an empty cellars, but in the 4th a key was turned and a bolt drawn, and it let us out presently in the bottom of a deep square well of fog. A similar door faced it across this area. Raffles had the lantern close against it, and was hiding the light with his body, when a short and sudden crash made my heart stand still. The next moment I saw the door was wide open, and Raffles standing within, beckoning me with a jimmy. Door number 1, he whispered. Deuce knows how many more there'll be, but I know 2 at least. We won't have to make much more noise over them either. Down there's less risk. We were now at the bottom of the exact fellow to the narrow stairwell which we had just ascended, the yard, or well, being the one thing common to both the private and business premises. But this flight led us to no open passage. Instead, a singularly solid mahogany door confronted us at the top. I thought so, muttered Raffles, holding me the lantern and pocketing a bunch of skeleton keys, after tampering for a few moments with the lock. It'll be an hour's work to get through that. Can't you pick it? No, I know these locks. That's no use trying. We must cut it out, and it'll take us an hour. It took us 47 minutes by my watch, or rather, it took Raffles, and never in my life have I seen anything so deliberately done. My part was simply to stand by with a dark lantern in one hand and a small bottle of rock oil in the other. Raffles had produced a pretty embroidered case, intended obviously for his razors, but filled instead with the tools of his secret trade, including the rock oil. He took off his covert coat and, with his blazer spread neat open on the top step, knelt on them, turned up his short cuffs, and went to work with brace and bits near the keyhole. But first he oiled up the bits to minimize the noise, and this he did invariably before beginning the fresh hole, and often in the middle. It took 32 separate borings to cut round the lock. I noticed that though the first circular orifice Raffles thrust a forefinger, then, as the circle became an ever-lengthening oval, he got his hand through up to the thumb, and I heard him swiftly swear soft to himself. "I was afraid of that. What is it?" "An iron gate on the other side." "How on earth are we to get through that?" I asked in dismay. "Pick the lock. There may be two. In that case we shall have to make two fresh holes in the open, and the door opens inwards. It won't open 2 inches as it is." I confess I did not feel sanguine about the lock-picking, seeing that one lock had baffled us already, and my disappointment and impatience must have been a revelation to me as I had stopped to think. My moral sense and my sense of fear were stricken by a common paralysis. And there I stood, shining my light and holding my oil bottle with a keener interest than I had ever brought to any honest avocation. And there knelt Raffles, with his black hair tumbled, and the same watchful, quiet, determined half-smile with which I had seen him send down over and over in a country match. At last the chain of holes was complete, the lock wrenched out boldly, and splendid bare arm plunged into the shoulder through the aperture and through the bars of the iron gate beyond. "Now," whispered Raffles, "if there's only one lock, it'll be in the middle. Joy, here it is. Only let me pick it, and we're through at last." He withdrew his arm. A skeleton key was selected from the bunch, and then back went his arm to the shoulder. It was a breathless moment. I heard the heart throbbing in my body and the very ticking of my pocket, and ever and anon a tinkle-tinkle of the skeleton key. Then, at last, there came a single, unmistakable click. In another minute, the mahogany door and the iron gate yawned behind us, and Raffles was sitting on an office table, wiping his face with the lantern throwing a steady beam on his side. We were now in a bare and roomy lobby behind the shop, but separated therefrom with an iron curtain, a very sight which filled me with despair. Raffles, however, did not appear in the least oppressed, but hung up his coat and hat on some pegs in the lobby before examining the curtain with his lantern. "Well, that's nothing," he said, after a moment's inspection. "We'll be through that in no time, but there's a door on the other side which may give us some trouble." "Another door?" I groaned. "And how do you mean to tackle this thing?" "Prise it up with a jimmy. The weak point in these iron curtains is the leverage. You can get those from below. But it makes a noise, and this is where you're coming in, Bunny. This is where I couldn't go without you. I must have you overhead the clock through when the street's clear. But come with you and show a light." Well, you may imagine how little I liked the prospect of this lonely vigil, and yet there was something very stimulating in the vital responsibility which it involved. Hitherto I had been a mere spectator. Now I was going to take part in the game, and the fresh excitement made me more than ever insensible to those considerations for conscience of the safety which we were already as dead nerves on my breast. So I took my post without a murmur in front of the room of the shop. The fixtures had been left for refusal of the incoming tenant, and fortunately for us they included Venetian blinds, which were already down. It was the simplest matter in the world to stand peeping through the laths in the street, and to beat twice with my foot when anyone was approaching, and once when all was clear again. The noises that even I could hear below, with the exception of one metallic crash at the beginning, were indeed incredibly slight. But they ceased together with a double rap of my toe, and the policeman passed quite half a dozen times beneath my eyes, and the man from whom I took to be the jeweler's watchman oftener still, during the better part of an hour that I spent at the window. Once, indeed, my heart was in my mouth, but only once. It was when the watchman stopped and peered through the peephole into the lighted shop. I waited for his whistle. I waited for the gallows to the jail. But signals had been studiously obeyed, and the man passed on in the undisturbed serenity. In the end, I had to signal in my turn, and retraced my steps with the lighted matches down the broad stairs, and down the narrow ones, across the area, and up into the lobby where Raffles awaited me with an outstretched hand. "Well done, my boy," he said. "You're the same good man in a pinch. You shall ever have your reward. I've got £1,000 worth if I've pinched him a pennyworth. It's all in my pockets, and here's something else I found in the locker. Very decent port and some cigars meant for Danby's business friends. Take a pull, and you shall light up presently. I found a lavatory, too, and we must have a wash and brush up before we go out, for I'm as black as a sweep." The iron curtain was down, but he insisted on raising it until I could peep through the glass door on the other side and see his handiwork in the shop beyond. Here 2 electric lights were left burning all night long, and in their cold white rays I could see nothing amiss. I looked along an orderly lane, an empty glass counter on my left, glass cupboards to untouched silver on my right, and facing me in the filmy black eye of the peephole that shone like a strange moon in the street. The counter had not been emptied by Raffles. Its contents were in Chubb's safe, which he had given up at a glance, nor had he looked at the silver except to loose a cigarette case for me. He had confined himself entirely to the shop window. This was 3 compartments, each secured for the night by removable panels with separate locks. Raffles had removed them a few hours before their time, and the electric light shone on a corrugated shutter bare with the ribs of an empty carapace. Every article of value was gone from the one place where the invisible from the little window in the door. Everywhere else it was done had been left overnight. But for the train of mangled doors behind the iron curtain, a bottle of wine, a cigar box with which liberties had been taken, and a rather black towel in the lavatory, a burnt match here and there, and our finger marks on the dusty banisters, not a trace of our visit would we leave. "Had it in my head so long," said Raffles as we strolled through the streets towards dawn, "for all the world as though we were returning from a dance. No, Bunny, I never thought of it till I saw the upper part empty for a month ago, and bought a few things from the shop and get the lie of the land. That reminds me, I never paid for them. But, by Jove, I will tomorrow, and that isn't poetic justice, what is? One visit showed me the possibilities of the place, but the second convinced me of the impossibilities without a pal. So I practically given up the idea, and when you came along on the very night and in the very plight for it. But here we are at the Albany. I hope there's some fire left, for I don't know how you feel, Bunny, but for my part, I'm as cold as Keats' owl." He could think of Keats on his way from a felony. He could hanker for his fireside like another. Floodgates were loosened within me, and the plain English of our adventure rushed over me like an icy torrent. Raffles was a burglar. I had helped him to commit one burglary, and therefore I was a burglar too. Yet I could stand and warm myself by his fire, and watch him empty his pockets as though we had done nothing wonderful or wicked. I saw that he was emptying his pockets. The table sparkled with the hoard. Rings by the dozen, diamonds by the score, bracelets, pendants, aigrettes, necklaces, pearls, rubies, amethysts, sapphires, and diamonds always. Diamonds in everything. Flashing bayonets of light, dazzling me and blinding me, making me disbelieve because I could no longer forget. Last of all came no gem, but indeed my own revolver from his inner pocket, and that struck a chord. I suppose I said something. My hand flew out. I can see Raffles now as he looked at me once more with a high arch of each clear eye. I can see him pick out the cartridges with his quiet, cynical smile before he would give me my pistol back again. "You mayn't believe it, Bunny," he said, "but I never carried a loaded one before. On the whole, I think it gives one confidence, yet it would be very awkward if anything went wrong. One might use it, and that's not the game at all. Oh, though I have often thought that the murderer was just done the trick, must have great sensations before things got too hot for him. Don't look so distressed, my dear chap. I've never had those sensations, and I don't suppose I ever shall." "But this much you have done before," I said hoarsely. "Before? My dear Bunny, you offend me. Did it look like my first attempt? Of course I've done it before." "Often? No, not often enough to destroy the charm at the events. Never, as a matter of fact, unless I'm cursedly hard up. Did you hear about the Timothy diamonds? Well, that was my last one. A poor lot of paste they were. Then there was the little business of the Dormer houseboat at Henley. That was mine also, such as it was." "How came you to begin?" I asked, as curiosity overwhelmed mere wonder. The fascination of his career gradually wove itself into my fascination for the man. "Ah, that's a long story," said Raffles. "It was in the colonies, when I was out there playing cricket. It's too long a story to tell you now, but I was in much the same fix as you are tonight, and it was my only way out. I never meant it for anything more, but I tasted blood, and it was all over for me. Why settle down to some humdrum and congenial billet when excitement, romance, danger, and a decent living were all going bagging together? Of course, it's very wrong, but you can't all be moralists, and the distribution of wealth is very wrong to begin with. Besides, you're not at all the time. I only wonder if you'll like the life as much as I do." "Like it?" cried out. "Not I. It's not the life for me. Once is enough." "You wouldn't give me a hand another time?" "Don't ask me, Raffles. Don't ask me, for God's sake." "Yet you said you would do anything for me. You asked me to name the crime. But I knew at this time you didn't mean it. You didn't go back on me tonight, and that ought to satisfy me. Goodness knows. I suppose I'm ungrateful and unreasonable and all that. I ought to let it end at this, but you're the very man for me, Bunny. The very man. Just think of how we got through tonight. Not a scratch. Not a hitch. There's nothing very terrible in it, you see. Never would be, while we worked together." He was standing in front of me with a hand on either shoulder. He was smiling as he knew so well how to smile. I turned on my heel, planted my elbows on the chimney-piece, and my burning head between my hands. Next instant, a still hardier hand had fallen on my back. "All right, my boy, you're quite right, and I'm worse than wrong. I'll never ask it again. Go if you want to, and come again about midday for the cash. There's no bargain, of course. I'll get you out of your scrape, especially after the way you've stood by me tonight." I was round again, with my blood on fire. "I'll do it again," I said through my teeth. He shook his head. "Not you," he said, smiling quite good-humoredly on my insane enthusiasm. "I will. I cried to you an oath." "I'll lend you a hand as often as you like. What does it matter now? I've been in it once. I'll do it again. I'll go to the devil anyhow. I can't go back, and wouldn't if I could. Perhaps I'm bitten with just as you were. Perhaps I meant what I said when you promised me to help, and perhaps I still mean it. What does it matter? When you want me, I'm your man." And that is how Raffles and I joined felonious forces on the Ides of March. And damn it, I paused the ads, and I didn't need to. Oh well. We will be back after the ads. Welcome back, everyone. We are still streaming, and we are going to get into the second story out of this session. So again, by E.W. Hornung, story number 2. A costume piece. London was just talking of one whose name is already a name and nothing more. Reuben Rosenthal had made his millions in the diamond fields of South Africa and had come home to enjoy them accordingly to his lights. How he went to work will scarcely be forgotten by any reader of the halfpenny evening papers, which reveled in endless anecdotes of his original indigence and present prodigality, varied with interesting particulars of the extraordinary establishment which the millionaire set up in St. John's Wood. Here he kept retinue of Kaffirs, who were literally his slaves, and hence he would sally with enormous diamonds in his shirt and on his finger, and the convoy of prize-fighter of a heinous repute, who was not, however, by any means the worst element of the Rosenthal menagerie. So said common gossip, but the fact was sufficiently established by the interference of the police on at least one occasion, followed by certain magisterial proceedings which were reported with justifiable gusto and huge headlines in the papers aforesaid. And this was all my knowledge of Reuben Rosenthal, up to the time when the old Bohemian Club, having fallen on evil ways, found it worth its while to organize a great dinner in honor of so wealthy an exponent of the club's principles. I was not at the banquet myself, but a member took Raffles, who told me all about it that very night. "Most extraordinary show I ever went to in my life," he said. "As for the man himself, well, I was prepared for something grotesque, but the fellow fairly took my breath away. To begin with, he's the most astounding brute to look at, well over 6 feet, with a chest like a barrel, and a great hook nose and the reddest hair and whiskers you ever saw. Drank like a fish, but only got muddled enough to make us a speech that I wouldn't have missed for £10. But I'm only sorry you weren't there too, Bunny, old chap." I began to be sorry myself, for Raffles was anything but an excitable person, and never had I seen him so excited before. He had been following Rosenthal's example. His coming to my rooms at midnight merely to tell me about his dinner was in itself so extraordinary as to excuse my suspicion, which was certainly at variance with my knowledge of the man. "Well, what did he say?" I inquired mechanically, divining some subtler explanation of this visit, and wondering what in the world it could be. "Say?" cried Raffles. "What did he not say? He boasted of his rise, he bragged of his riches, and the blackguarded society for taking him up for his money and dropping him out for sheer pique of curiosity and jealousy, because he had so much. He mentioned names, too, with the most charming freedom, and swore he was a good man to the old country, had to show pace the old Bohemians. To prove it, he pointed to a great diamond in the middle of his shirt front, with a little finger loaded with another just like it. And which of our bloated princes could show a pair like that? As a matter of fact, they seemed quite wonderful stones, with a curious purple gleam to them that must mean a pot of money. But old Rosenthal swore that he didn't take £50,000 for the two, and wanted to know where the other man was who went about the 25,000 on his shirt front and another 25 on his little finger. He didn't exist. And if he did, he wouldn't have a pluck to wear them, but had he, he'd tell us why. and before you could say Jack Robinson, he had whipped out a whacking great revolver. Not at the table. At the table, in the middle of his speech. But it was nothing to do what he wanted to. He actually wanted us to let him write his name on the bullets on the opposite wall to show us why he hasn't been afraid to go out with all the diamonds. That brute Purvis, the prizefighter, who was his paid bully, had to bully the master before he could be persuaded out of it. There was quite a panic at the moment. One fellow who was a queer got under the table, and the waiters bolted into a man. What a grotesque scene! Grotesque enough, but I rather wish they had let him do the thing and blaze away. He was as keen as knives to show us how he could take care of his purple diamonds. And, do you know, Bounty? I was keen as knives to see it. And Raffles leant towards me with a sly, slow smile that made the hidden meaning of his visit only too plain, at least to me at last. So you think of having a try for the diamonds yourself? He shrugged his shoulders. It's horridly obvious, I admit, but yes, I have set my heart upon them. To be quite frank, I've had them in my conscience for some time. I couldn't hear so much of a man with a prizefighter and his diamonds without feeling it's a kind of duty to have a go for them. But when it comes to brandishing the revolver and practically challenging the world, the thing becomes inevitable. It is simply thrust upon one. I was fated to hear that challenge, Bunny, and I, for one, must take it up. I was only sorry I couldn't get on my hind legs and say so then and there. Well, I said, I don't see the necessity as things are with us, but, of course, I'm your man. My tone may have been half-hearted. I did my best to make it otherwise, but it was barely a month since our Bond Street exploit, and we certainly could afford to behave ourselves for several months to come. I thought we ought to know when we were well off, and could see no point in our running fresh risks before we were obliged. On the other hand, I was anxious not to show the least disposition to break the pledge in which I had given a month ago, but it was not on my manifest faint-heartedness that Raffles fastened. Necessity, my dear Bunny. Does the writer only write when the wolf is at the door? Does a painter paint for bread alone? Must you and I be driven to crime like Tom and Beau and Dick of Whitechapel? You pain me, my dear chap. You needn't laugh, because you do. Art for art's sake is a vile catchword, but I confess it appeals to me. In the case of motives are absolutely pure, for I doubt if we shall ever be able to dispose of such particular stones. But if I don't try for them, after tonight I shall never be able to hold up my head again. His eye twinkled, but it glittered too. We shall have a work cut out for us, was all I said. And do you suppose I should be keen on it if I weren't? Cried Raffles. My dear fellow, I would rob a millionaire if I only could, but I could no more scoop till when the shopwalker wasn't looking, and I could bag the apples out of an old woman's basket. Even that little business last month was a sordid affair, but it was necessary, and I think it strategically redeemed to some extent. Now, there's some credit and more sport in going where they boast that they're on guard against you. The Bank of England, for example, is an ideal crib, but that would need half a dozen of us with years to give it to the job. And meanwhile, Reuben Rosenthal is high enough game for you and me. We know he's armed. We know that Billy Purvis can fight. It'll be no soft thing, I grant you, but what, my good Bunny, what of that? A man's reach must extend his grasp, dear boy, or what the deuce is ambition for? I'd rather we didn't gratify hers just yet, I answered, laughing, for his spirit was irresistible, and the plan was growing upon me, despite my qualms. Because 2 eyes are as good as 4, and take up less room. Never hunt in couples unless you're obliged. But don't you look offended, Bunny. There'll be plenty for you to do when the time comes, and I promise you. You shall have your share of the fun, never fear, and a purple diamond for all by yourself, if we're lucky. On the whole, however, this conversation left me less than lukewarm, and I still remember the depression which came upon me when Raffles was gone. I saw the folly of the enterprise to which I had committed myself, the sheer gratuitous and unnecessary folly of it, and the paradoxes in which Raffles was revealed, and the frivolous casualty which was nevertheless half sincere, and which was his personality rendered wholly plausible for the moment of utterance, appealed very little to me when I recalled in cold blood. I admired the spirit of pure mischief in which he seemed prepared to risk his liberty and his life, but I did not find it an infectious spirit on calm reflection. Yet the thought of withdrawal was not to be entertained for a moment. On the contrary, I was impatient of the delay ordained by the Raffles, and perhaps no small part of my secret disaffection came to his galling determination to do without me until the last moment. It made it no better that this characteristic of the man and his attitude towards me. For a month we had been, I suppose, the thickest thieves in all of London, and yet our intimacy was curiously incomplete. With all his charming frankness, there was a Raffles vein of capriciousness reserved for what was perceptible enough to be very irritating. He had the instinctive secretiveness of an invertebrate criminal. I said nothing about it, but it ranked every day, and never more than it was in the week that succeeded the Rosenthal dinner. When I met Raffles at the club, he would tell me nothing, and when I went to his rooms, he was out, or pretended to be. One day he told me he was getting on well, but slowly. It was a more ticklish game than he had thought, but when I began to ask questions, he would say no more. Then and there, in my annoyance, I took my own decision. Since he would not tell me anything of the result of his vigils, I determined to keep one of my own account. That very evening found my way to the millionaire's front gates. The house he was occupying is, I believe, quite the largest in the St. John's Woods district. It stands in an angle formed by two broad thoroughfares, neither of which, as it happens, is a bus route, and I thought of it quieter spots exist within a 4-mile radius. Quiet also was the great square house, and its garden of grass plots and shrubs. The lights were low, and the millionaire and his friends obviously spending their evening elsewhere. The garden walls were only a few feet high. In one there was a slide door opening to the glass passage, and the other two were 5-barred, grained and varnished gates, one at the other end of a little semicircular drive, and both wide open. So still was the place that I had a great mind to walk boldly in and learn something of the premises. In fact, I was on the point of doing so when I heard a quick shuffling step on the pavement behind me. I turned around and faced the dark scowl and the dirty clenched fists of a dilapidated tramp. "You fool," he said. "You utter idiot!" "Raffles?" "That's it," he whispered savagely. "Tell all the neighborhood and give me away at the top of your voice." With that, he turned his back upon me and shambled down the road, shrugging his shoulders and muttering to himself as though I had refused him alms. A few moments I stood astounded, indignant, at a loss. Then I followed him. His feet trailed, his knees gave, his back was bowed, and his head kept nodding. It was the gait of a man 80 years of age. Presently he waited for me midway between two lampposts, and I came up as he was lighting a rank tobacco and a cutty pipe with an evil-smelling match, and this flame showed me the suspicion of a smile. "You must forgive my heat, Bunny, but it is really very foolish of you. Here I am, trying every dodge, begging at the door one night and hiding in the shrubs the next, doing every mortal thing but stand and stare at the house as you went and did. It's a costume piece, and in a rush of your ordinary clothes. I tell you, they're on the lookout for us night and day. It's the toughest nut we've ever tackled." "Well," said I, "if you had told me before, I shouldn't have come. You told me nothing." He looked at me hard from under the broken brim of the battered billycock. "You're right," he said at length. "I've been too close. It's become second nature with me whenever I'm done anything. But here's an end of it. Bunny, so far you're concerned. I'm going home now. I want you to follow me, but for heaven's sake, keep your distance, and don't speak to me again until I speak to you. There, give me a start. And he was off again, a decrepit vagabond with his hands in his pockets, his elbows squared, and frayed coat-tails swinging raggedly from side to side. I followed him to the Finchley Road. There he took an Atlas omnibus, and I sat some rows behind him at the stop, but not far enough to escape the pest of his vile tobacco. That he could carry his character sketch to such a pitch, he who would only smoke one brand of cigarettes. It was, at last, the least touch of insatiable artist, and it was charmed away by the mortification that still remained in my spirit. I felt once more the fascination of a comrade who was forever dazzling one with a fresh and unsuspected facet of his character. As we neared Piccadilly, I wondered what he was to do. Surely he was not going into Albany like this. No, he took another omnibus to Sloane Street, and sitting behind him as before. At Sloane Street we changed again, and were presently in the long, lean artery of the King's Road. I was now all agog to know our destination, nor was I kept many more minutes in doubt. Raffles got down. I followed. He crossed the road and disappeared into the dark turning. I pressed after him, and was in time to see his coat-tails be plunged into a still darker flagged alley to his right. He was holding himself up and stepping out like a young man once more. Also, in a subtle way, he already looked less disreputable. But I alone was there to see him. The alley was absolutely deserted and desperately dark, and the further end opened a door with a latchkey, and it was darker yet within. Instinctively I drew back and heard him chuckle. We could no longer see each other. "All right, Bunny. There's no hanky-panky this time. These are studios, my friend, and I'm one of the lawful tenants." Hey, Matsu. Indeed, in another minute we were in a lofty room with a skylight, easels, dressing cupboard, platform, and every other adjunct save the signs of actual labor. The first thing I saw, as Raffles lit the gas, was its reflection of his top hat on the pegs beside the rest of his normal garments. "Looking for the works of art," continued Raffles, lighting a cigarette and beginning to divest himself of his rags. "I'm afraid you won't find any, but there's a canvas I'm always going to make a start upon. I tell them I'm looking high and low for my ideal model. I have a lit stove on principle once a week, and look on it, and leave papers, and smell of Sullivans. How good they are after a shag. Meanwhile, I pay my rent, and am a good tenant in every way. It's a very useful little pied-à-terre. There's no saying how useful it might be in a pinch. As it is, the billycock comes in, and the topper goes out. Nobody takes the slightest notice of either, and at the time of night the chances are that there's not a soul in the buildings except ourselves." "You never told me you went in disguises," said I, watching him as he cleans the grime from his face and hands. "No, Bunny, I've treated you very shabbily all around. There was really no reason why I shouldn't have shown you this place a month ago, and yet there was no point in my doing so, and circumstances are just conceivable in which it would have suited us both for you to have a genuine ignorance of my whereabouts. I have something to sleep on, as you perceive, in case of a need, and, of course, my name is not Raffles in the King's Road, so you will not see that one bolt further, and fare worse. Meanwhile, you use the place as a dressing-room?" "It's my private pavilion," said Raffles. "Disguises? In some cases they're half the battle, and it's always pleasant to feel that, if the worst comes to the worst, you needn't necessarily be convicted under your own name. Then there's indispensable in dealing with fences. I drive on all my bargains in my tongue and railment to the shortage. If I didn't, there'd be very devil to pay in blackmail. Now, this cupboard's full of all sorts of toggery. I tell a woman who cleans a room that it's for my models when I find them. By the way, I only hope I've got something that'll fit you, for you'll want a rig for tomorrow night. Tomorrow night? I exclaimed. What do you mean by that? The trick, said Raffles. I intended writing to you as soon as I got back from my chambers, to ask you to look me up tomorrow afternoon. Then I was going to unfold my plan of campaign and take you straight into action then and there. There's nothing like putting a nervous player in first. But the setting of the pads upsets the apple cart. That and another of my reasons for being so confoundedly close. You must try to forgive me. I remembered how well you played us last trip, without any time to weaken it on the format. All I want is for you to be as cool and smart tomorrow night as you were then. Though, by Jove, there's no comparison between the two cases. I thought you would find it so. You were right, I have. Mind you, I don't say this by any tougher job all around, but we shall probably get in without any difficulty at all. It's a getting out again that may flummox us. That's the worst of the irregular household, cried Raffles, with quite a burst of virtuous indignation. I assure you, Bunny, I spent the whole of Monday night in the shrubbery on the garden, looking next door over the wall, and if you'll believe me, somebody was there all night long. I don't mean the Kaffirs. I don't believe they ever get to bed, the poor devils. No, I mean Rosenthal himself, and that pasty-faced beast Purvis. They were up and drinking from midnight till they came in, to broad daylight when I cleared out. Even then I left them sober enough to slang each other. By the way, it's very nearly time come to blows in the garden, within a few yards of me, and I heard something that might come in useful to make Rosenthal shoot crooked in a critical moment. You know what an IDB is? Illicit diamond buyer? Exactly. Well, it seems Rosenthal was one. He must have let it out to Purvis in his cups. Anyhow, I heard Purvis taunting him with it, and threatening him with the breakwater at Cape Town, and I began to think our friends are friend and foe. But about tomorrow night, there's nothing subtle about my plan. It's simply to go in when these fellows are out on the loose, and to lie low till they come back, and longer. If possible, we must doctor the whiskey. That would simplify the whole thing, though it's not a very sportsman game to play. Still, we must remember Rosenthal's revolver. We don't want him to sign his name on us. With all the Kaffirs about, however, it's 10-1 on the whiskey, and 100-1 against us if we go looking for it. A brush with a heathen would spoil everything, if it were no more. Besides, there are the ladies. A deuce there are. His relations, the very voices for raising Cain. I fear the clamor. It would be fatal to us. Au contraire, if we can manage to stow ourselves away unbeknown, half the battle will be won. If Rosenthal turns in queer, it's a purple diamond apiece. If he sits up sober, it may be a bullet instead. We will hope not, Bunny. All the firing wouldn't be on his side, but it's on the knees of the gods. And if we left it when we shook hands in Piccadilly, not by any means as much later as I would have wished. Raffles would not ask me to his rooms that night. He said he made it a rule to have a long night before playing cricket and other games. His final word to me was framed on his same principle. Mind, take care of yourself tonight, Bunny. Take care of yourself, as you value your life and mine. I remember my abject obedience and the endless, sleepless night it gave me, and the roofs of the houses opposite standing out the last against the blue-gray sky of London dawn. I wondered whether I should ever see another, and was very hard on myself for that little expedition which I was about to make on my own wilful account. It was between 8 and 9 o'clock in the evening when we took up our positions at the garden adjoining the Reuben Rosenthal. The house itself was shut up, thanks to the outrageous libertine next door, who, by driving away his neighbors, had gone far towards delivering himself into our hands. Practically secure from surprise on that side, we could watch our house from the safe side of the wall and just high enough to see over, while a fair margin of shrubs in either garden afforded us an additional protection. Thus entrenched, we had stood an hour, watching the pair of lighted windows with vague shadows flitting continuously across the drawn blinds, and listening to the drawing of corks, and clink of glasses, and the gradual crescendo of coarse voices within. Our luck seemed to have deserted us. The owner of the purple diamonds was dining at home, and dining with undue length. I thought it was a dinner party, Raffles deferred. In the end, he was proved right. Wheels grated on the drive, a carriage and pair stood at the steps. There was a stampede from the dining room, and the loud voices died away. They burst forth presently on the porch. Let me make our position perfectly clear. We were over the wall, at the side of the house, but a few feet from the dining room windows. On our right, one angle of the building cut the back lawn in two diagonally. On our left, another angle just permitted us to see the jutting steps and the waiting carriage. We saw Rosenthal come out, saw the glimmer of the diamonds before anything. Then came the pugilist, then a lady with the head of hair like a bath sponge. Then another, and the party was complete. Raffles ducked and pulled me down in great excitement. "The ladies are going with them," he whispered. "This is great." "That's better still." "The gardenia," the millionaire had bawled. "And that's the best of all," said Raffles, standing upright as the hoofs of the wheels crunched through the gates and rattled off into the fine speed. "Now what?" I whispered, trembling with excitement. "They'll be clearing away. Yes, here come the shadows, the drawing-room open on the lawn. Bunny, it's a psychological moment. Where's that mask?" I produced it with a hand whose trembling and vain to stay still, and could have died for Raffles when he made no comment on what he could not fail to notice. His own hands were firm and cool as he adjusted my mask for me, and then his own. "By Jove, old boy," he whispered cheerfully, "you look about the greatest ruffian I ever saw. This mask alone will down a horse, if we meet one. But I'm glad I remembered to tell you not to shave. You'll pass for a Whitechapel if the worst comes to the worst, and don't forget to talk the lingo. Better sulk like a mule if you're not sure of it, and leave the tip to me. But please, our stars, there be no need. Now, are you ready?" "Quite." "Got your gag?" "Yes." "Shooter?" "Yeah." "Then follow me." In an instant we were over the wall, and another on the lawn behind the house. There was no moon. The very stars in their courses had veiled themselves for our benefit. I crept at my leader's heels to some French windows opening upon the shallow veranda. He pushed. They yielded. "Luck again," he whispered. "Nothing but luck. Now for a light." And the light came. A good score of the electric burners glowed red for a fraction of a second, then rained merciless white beams into our blinded eyes. And we found ourselves in sight, 4 revolvers covering us, and between 2 of them the colossal frame of Reuben Rosenthal, thick with a wheezy laughter from head to foot. "Good evening, boys," he hiccuped. "Glad to see you, by James. Shift for the finger. You on the left, though, you're a dead boy. I mean you, the beggar." He roared out at Raffles. "I know you. I've been waiting for you. I've been watching you all this week. Plucky smart you thought yourself, didn't you? One day begging, the next day shamming ill, and the next one you're old pals with the Kimberly, and they never come in when I'm there. But you left the same tracks every day, you buggins, and left the same tracks every night, all around blessed premises." "All right, governor," drawled Rattles. "Don't excite yourself. It's a fair do. We don't want to know how you brung it on us. Only, don't you go and shoot cross 'cause we lent on. Size me." "Aye, you're a knowing one," said Rosenthal, fingering his triggers. "But you stuck a knowing her." "Oh, thus? We know all about it. Set a thief to catch a thief, you huss." My eyes had torn themselves from the black round muzzles, from the accursed diamonds that had been our snare, and the pasty pig-face over the overfed pugilist, and the flaming cheeks and hooked nose of Rosenthal himself. I was looking beyond them at the doorway, filled with quivering silk and plush, black faces, wide eyeballs, and woolly plaits. But a sudden silence recalled my attention to the millionaire, and only his nose retained its color. "What do you mean?" he whispered with a hoarse oath. "Spit it out, or I shall have to drill you." "Wolf price that breakwater," drawled Raffles coolly. "Eh?" Rosenthal's revolvers were describing widening orbits. "Worth the price of breakwater, old IDB." "Where'd you get that from?" asked Rosenthal with a rattle in his thick neck meant for mirth. "You may as well ask," said Raffles. "That's all over the place where I'd come from." "Who could have spread such rot?" "I don't know," said Raffles. "Ask the gentleman on your left. Perhaps he knows." The gentleman on his left had turned livid with emotion. Guilty conscience never declared itself to plainer terms. For a moment his small eyes bulged as if they would leave his head. The next, he had pocketed his pistols with professional instinct and was upon us with his fists. "Out with the light! Out with the light!" cried Rosenthal in a frenzy. He was too late. No sooner had the burly pugilist obstructed his fire than Raffles was through the window at a bound, while I, for standing still and saying nothing, was scientifically felled to the floor. I could not have been many moments without my senses. When I recovered them, there was a great to-do in the garden, but I had the drawing-room to myself. I sat up. Rosenthal and Purvis were rushing about outside, cursing the Kaffirs and nagging at each other. "Over that wall, I tell you!" "I tell you it was this one! Can't you whistle for the police?" "Police be hanged! I've had enough of the blessed police." "Then we'd better get back and make sure the others bound her." "Oh, make sure you're skinned. That's what you better do. Charlie, you, Black Hog, if you catch you sulking..." I never heard the threat. I was creeping from the drawing-room on my hands and knees, my own revolver swinging by the steel ring on my belt. For an instant I thought that the hall also was deserted. I was wrong. I crept upon a Kaffir on all fours. Poor beggar, I could not bring himself to deal with the base blow, so I threatened him with the most hideous way with my revolver, and left the white teeth chattering in his black head as I took the stairs 3 at a time. Why I went upstairs to that decisive fashion, as though I were on my course, I cannot explain. But garden and ground floor seemed alive with men. I might have done worse. I turned to the first room I came to on the first floor. It was an empty bedroom, though lit up, and never shall I forget how startled I was when I entered on encountering the awful villain that was myself at full length in the pier glass. Masked, armed, and ragged, I was indeed fit carrion for a bullet to the hangman, and to no one or the other I made up my mind. Nevertheless, I hid myself in the wardrobe behind the mirror, and there I stood shivering and cursing my fate. My folly, and Raffles most of all. Raffles first and last, for I dare say an hour. Then the wardrobe door was flung suddenly open. They had stolen into the room without a sound, and had hauled downstairs, and ignominiously a captive. Gross scenes followed in the hall. The ladies were now on the stage, and at the sight of a desperate criminal they screamed with one accord. Purvis and the ladies were calling for the police, and giving me in charge without delay. Rosenthal would not hear of it. He swore that he would shoot man or woman who left his sight. He had had enough of the police. He was not going to have them coming there to spoil sport. He was going to deal with me in his own way. With that, he dragged me from the other hands and flung me against the door, and sent a bullet crashing through the wood within an inch of my ear. "The drunken fool! It'll be murder!" shouted Purvis, getting in the way of the second time. "Murder it is, then. He's armed, isn't he? I shot him in self-defense. It'll be a warning to the others. Will you stand aside, or do you want it yourself?" "You idiot!" said Purvis, still between us. "I saw you take a neat tumblerful since you came in, and it's made you a perfect fool. Pull yourself together. You ain't going to do what you'll be sorry for." "Then I won't shoot at him. I'll only shoot round and round the old beggar." "You're quite right, old fellow. Wouldn't hurt him. Great mistake. Round and round. There, like that." His freckled paw shot up over Purvis's shoulder. The mauve lightning came from his ring, and a red flash from his revolver. The shrieks from the women and the reverberations died away. Some splinters fell upon my hair. The next instant the prizefighter disarmed him, and I was safe from the man, but finally doomed to the deep sea. The policeman was in our midst. He had entered through the drawing-room window. He was an officer of a few words and incredible promptitude. In a twinkling, he had handcuffs on my wrists, while the pugilist explained the situation, and his patron reviled the force and its representative of the impotent malignity. A fine watch they kept, a lot of good they did, coming in when it was all over, and the whole household might have been murdered while in bed. The officer only deigned to notice him as he marched off. "We know all about you, sir," he said contemptuously, and he refused the sovereign province offered. "You'll be seeing me again, sir, at Marylebone? Shall I come now?" "As you please, sir. I rather think the other gentleman requires you more, and I don't fancy this young man means to give me much trouble." "Oh, I'm coming quietly," I said, and I went. In silence, we traversed perhaps 100 yards. It must have been about midnight. We did not meet a soul. At last, I whispered, "How on earth did you manage it?" "Purely by luck," said Raffles. "I had the luck to get away clear through knowing every brick in the brick wall garden, and the double luck to have had those togs with me and the rest over at Chelsea. The helmet is one of my collection that I made up at Oxford. Here it goes over the wall, and we better carry the coat and the belt before we meet a real officer. I got them once for a fancy ball, ostensibly, and thereby hangs a yarn. I always thought they might come in useful a second time. The chief crux tonight was getting rid of the hansom that sought me back. I sent them off to Scotland Yard with 10 bob and a special message to good old Mackenzie. The whole detective department will be at Rosenthal's in about half an hour. Of course, I speculated on our gentleman's hatred of the police, and another huge slice of luck. If you'd got away, and good, not have I felt that the man's to play with his mouse for very much longer. Yes, Bunny, I've been more of a costume piece than I intended, and we've come out with a good deal less than credit. But by Jove, we're jolly lucky to have come out of this one at all." Okay, that was an interesting one. The story is about another criminal who has fun being a criminal. And considering how long the stories are, I'm not sure if I'd get through a third one. So I guess we'll go ahead and end off a little early. So let's see who might be on. Dang, I'm just coughing up a storm now. No, I don't read very people. How often can I say I read Sophia? But again, thank you all for coming in. I'm glad I had people come in. And I'm not streaming tomorrow because I will be doing possibly be doing the Shards from the Edge. So, hope you all have a great night.
In a quiet town where the shadows play, there's a little bookshop tucked away. During the day he wears a human face, the wolf from the lore in a cozy space. Dusty tomes line the shelves with care. Each story whispers secrets almost like a prayer. With every page turned, a world comes alive. In the heart of this wolf is where dreams thrive. Oh, he howls at the moon when the night draws near.